There is a version of Jannik Sinner that almost nobody outside a small mountain town in northern Italy ever got to see. Not the ice-cold baseline machine who now sits atop men's tennis. A different boy entirely, flying down a snow-covered slope at terrifying speed, competing in giant slalom races, being talked about not as a future tennis star, but as one of the most promising young ski racers in the country. For most of his early childhood, that was the plan, not tennis. Skiing. It's strange to say that out loud now, given how completely Sinner has come to define an era of men's tennis. The ice in his veins temperament, the relentless baseline precision, the quiet dominance that's made him nearly unbeatable at the biggest tournaments in the world. But none of that was ever supposed to happen on a tennis court in the first place. It was supposed to happen on a mountain. So how does a nationally competitive junior skier, a kid on track for one sport, in a region of Italy practically built around winter sports, end up becoming the most dominant tennis player of his generation instead? And what does it say about him that, at an age when most kids can barely decide what to have for breakfast, he made a decision to walk away from something he was already excelling at, for something he'd barely started? This isn't a story about inherited destiny, about a family legacy pulling a child toward a predetermined future. This is almost the opposite. This is the story of a boy who had to actively choose to leave one identity behind, with no guarantee that the new one would ever amount to anything at all. Jannik Sinner was born in San Candido, a small town in the Dolomites, in the German-speaking region of northern Italy, a place better known for ski slopes than tennis courts. His father worked as a chef, his mother as a waitress, and the family's relationship with sport, from the very beginning, was tied to the mountains surrounding them, not to tennis. By the time he was 7 or 8, Sinner wasn't just skiing recreationally. He was competing. Giant slalom, one of the most technically demanding disciplines in ski racing, became his primary focus, and he was good enough at it that people in the local skiing community genuinely believed he had a future in the sport. He trained seriously, competed nationally, and by most accounts, tennis at that stage of his life was little more than a secondary activity, something he did occasionally, almost as a hobby, while skiing remained the real ambition. That changed around age 13. Faced with a decision that most 13-year-olds never have to seriously confront, Sinner chose to walk away from ski racing entirely and commit himself fully to tennis instead. It wasn't a small decision made lightly. It meant giving up a sport where he already had real, demonstrated success, in favor of one where he was, at best, a promising beginner, with no guarantee of ever reaching a competitive level. The decision also meant leaving home. To train seriously, Sinner moved away from San Candido to Bordighera, on Italy's western coast, hundreds of kilometers from the mountains he'd grown up in, to work under coach Riccardo Piatti at his academy. Piatti had a track record of developing top-level professionals, and taking on a 13-year-old former skier with unconventional tennis fundamentals was, by his own later admission, something of a gamble. For the next several years, Sinner effectively rebuilt himself as an athlete from close to scratch. His ski racing background had given him extraordinary balance, leg strength, and an unusual tolerance for repetitive, grinding physical training, qualities that would later become defining traits of his tennis game. But the actual tennis technique, the years of match experience that most future professionals accumulate throughout childhood, had to be compressed into a much shorter window than most of his eventual rivals had. Alcaraz was hitting balls at 3. Sinner was still deciding between 2 different sports at 13. By his late teens, the gamble was clearly paying off. He turned professional, climbed through the rankings faster than almost anyone expected, and by his early 20s had become one of the most feared competitors in men's tennis, eventually reaching world number 1 and winning multiple Grand Slam titles. But underneath that rapid rise was a foundation almost nobody else in the sport shared. A late start, a completely different athletic background, and a single, deliberate choice, made at 13 years old, to bet his entire future on a sport he'd barely started taking seriously. There's a specific kind of courage in walking away from something you're already good at, in favor of something you might never be good at all. Psychologists who study elite athletes talk about this as one of the hardest decisions a young competitor can face. Not the courage to keep pushing forward in a sport you've already committed to, but the courage to abandon a known identity for a completely uncertain one. Consider what Sinner actually gave up at 13. He wasn't a casual hobbyist skier deciding between two equally undeveloped interests. He was a nationally competitive junior racer, someone with a real, demonstrated pathway toward a serious skiing career, in a region of Italy where that pathway was well understood and well respected. Walking away from that wasn't just switching hobbies. It was closing a door that had already started to open, based on nothing more than a hunch and a willingness to start over. That kind of decision requires something most 13-year-olds simply don't have: the ability to tolerate massive uncertainty in exchange for a possibility that might never materialize. Most children, even talented ones, gravitate toward whatever feels safest, whatever offers the clearest path to continued success. Sinner did the opposite. He chose the far riskier option, at an age when the consequences of that choice, years of foundational development, a completely different skill set, a body trained for one sport suddenly being asked to develop another, could easily have resulted in him excelling at neither. There's also something revealing in how he made that choice. This wasn't a family legacy pulling him toward tennis, the way it did for so many young prodigies raised inside a tennis-obsessed household. Sinner's parents weren't tennis players themselves. There was no grandfather who built a club, no father who saw his own unfinished ambitions reflected in his son's forehand. This decision came from somewhere internal, a kid's own read on his future, made with a level of self-direction that most adults struggle to summon, let alone a 13-year-old. That self-directed decisiveness may be the single most important thread connecting the boy who left the mountains to the champion we see today. The same willingness to make a difficult, uncertain choice and commit to it fully, rather than waiting for circumstances to make the decision easier, shows up constantly in how Sinner approaches his tennis now. The methodical rebuilding of his game under new coaching. The willingness to make unpopular scheduling and training decisions if he believes they serve his long-term development. Even his notoriously unemotional on-court demeanor reflects a mind that seems to process risk and uncertainty differently than most of his peers. Calmly, analytically, without the visible anxiety that difficult decisions usually produce in people that age. There's a certain irony in the fact that the man now known for playing with almost no visible emotion, no wasted motion, no wavering under pressure, built that exact temperament by making one of the most emotionally difficult decisions a child athlete can face, choosing to leave behind a sport he was genuinely good at, for one where success was nowhere close to guaranteed. The mountain never fully left him, even if he did leave it. That same balance, that same physical resilience built through years of ski training, still shows up in how he moves on a tennis court today, efficient, grounded, almost impossibly stable under pressure. But the more important inheritance from those years wasn't physical at all. It was the mindset, the willingness, even as a child, to sit with genuine uncertainty rather than cling to whatever felt safest, to choose the harder, less certain path simply because some part of him believed it was the right one. Most of the players Sinner competes against today built their tennis identities from early childhood. With years of match experience most young athletes could only dream of accumulating. Sinner started later, came from a completely different athletic world, and had to compress an entire developmental process into a fraction of the time his rivals had. And yet here he is, a Grand Slam champion, a former ski racer who quietly became one of the most feared competitors the sport has ever produced. Maybe that's the real lesson underneath this story. Not that Sinner was always destined for tennis greatness, waiting to be discovered. But that greatness, in his case, came from somewhere much less romantic and far more remarkable. A 13-year-old boy, standing at a genuine fork in the road, choosing uncertainty over comfort, and simply refusing to look back. He left the mountain behind. He built an empire on the court instead. Every champion has an origin story that gets left out of the highlight reels. And for Jannik Sinner, his start's on a mountain, not a court. If this gave you a new way of seeing him, hit subscribe. We tell the stories others skip.